Hello and welcome to the 8th video in this series making simple Floppy Robin for a web browser using JavaScript and the Cocos2d framework. So last video then, just as a very quick recap, where did we end up? We ended up with the app more or less the same as the video before that one, except now that when the Robin dies there's a pause as it hits the floor to allow us to do stuff with scores and game overs, and then it resets the middle of the screen. During this pause then we don't process any clicks or anything like that. Nothing happens until the Robin resets the middle of the screen. So all's looking very good there. So what I want to do in this video then is a little bit of a continuation of the last one, but it's actually a lot simpler because I just want to complete some of the game logic. And the bit I want to complete in this one is the part to get ready to actually spawn or create the tubes that the Robin has to avoid on the screen. So the things that we're going to need to do if we've got the screen here, as you can see the app, hopefully you can see the mouse as well there, we're going to have tubes generated off the screen to the right, scrolling across right to left, and they're going to spawn at random intervals, but not completely random intervals, so probably 2 seconds or so, plus or minus a little bit of time. So that's what we want to implement in here. So without further ado, the first thing we're going to do is add some constants into GameManager.js as always. So I'm just going to scroll down the bottom from where we left off last time and just make a new constant called kTube spawn min time. So that's the minimum gap that we're going to have in seconds between tubes spawning. Going to put that 2.3 seconds. I found that leaves to a relatively okay game. And now I want to add a little variability to do that to this time. So I'm going to do tube spawn time variance, and that's going to be equal to 8. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to make the minimum time 2.3 seconds, but then we're going to add plus up to 0.8 seconds gap. You'll see how that works later on onto this, just at random, just to allow a little bit of variability on the distance between the tubes rather than being completely consistent. So that's all we need to do inside the GameManager.js. And now we need to go into our game.js and inside the init function here. And we need to create, right at the bottom just after the declaration of process touch, we need to create a couple more variables. So the way this will work is every time that we have a tick, so on the onTick function, we increment here the game time. We also want to keep track of how much time has elapsed since we last spawned a tube. When we spawn a tube then, we'll set this last time we spawned to 0 and then re-increment this until we hit the time that we've allocated until we want to spawn the next tube. So we could do this in a number of ways. We could actually just do this using the actual game time and recording that, but I thought it might be a bit easier to separate this out into separate variables. It doesn't really matter. So we're going to make one then called the last spawn time and set this equal to 0, and then we're going to make one called the next spawn time and set this equal also to 0. So one of those will be used for the time that we last spawned a tube, and this one will be set to the next time we want to spawn the next set of tubes. Okay, so now that we've integrated those, we want to actually make a function that does actually spawn the next time that we want to spawn the tubes. So I'll just scroll right down here, and after the re-enable after game over, let's declare a new function and we'll call this set spawn time. And this is what's going to be used to set the next spawning time then. So function, and the first thing we'll do then is, because we're now spawning, then the last spawn time will be set to 0. So time elapsed since the last time we spawned the tube is now 0. Then we want to set the next spawn time. Start. Next spawn time. And now what we want to do is we want to set that equal. Now normally that will be set equal to the minimum time, so our 2.3 seconds, but we want to add a little bit of randomness into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a random number from 0 to our 8 here, sorry, from 1 to our 8 here, and then we're going to divide that by 10 just to give us plus, like I said, anything from sort of 0.1 to 0.8 seconds variability on this. The way we'll do this is just using some random numbers. So we'll round it as well to the nearest integer so we don't get any complications. So we'll just say math.floor, because that rounds then, I hope, if I remember correctly, to the nearest integer. And then what we want inside here is our actual calculation. So what we'll say is, I'll just move the brackets there, otherwise I'm going to get very, very confused. So math dot, and then we want random, and then multiplied by our time variance that we've got here, multiply by our time variance plus 1, and then divide the whole result of that by 10 to go into tenths of a second, and then we can add on the min time like this. Actually, I'll just make this easier and try and move this onto a new line like so. Okay. And that then will give us our next spawn time, and let's just log that also to the console. So console.log and next spawn time set to, at least we can see what it is, this dot next spawn time. Okay, so we've defined these in the init function, and we've now set up a function to actually generate the time gap before we next spawn some tubes. And I've already seen that I've taken 7-8 minutes or so on this video, and I thought it was only the last 5. Okay, the next thing we want to do then is update some of the logic inside the onTick to actually generate our tubes. So what we want to do is increment the last spawn time by delta time. And like I said, we could have done this simply using the game time, but I find this a bit clearer for the tutorial. And then what we want to do inside here now is simply ask, okay then, if the last spawn time is greater than the next spawn time, I'm sure this is fairly obvious, then here we want to spawn some tubes. So we'll do console.log spawn tubes, and then what we need to do is set the spawn time like so. So that then here we will actually in future videos call the function to actually create some of the tubes that Robin's going to have to avoid, and then here we call our function that we've just created down here and set the times for the next pair of tubes or single tube to be spawned. So that should be fairly clear what we've done inside there. We've got one tiny more thing to do, as it is at the moment. We've got the next to the last spawn times completely equal. That'll create tubes absolutely instantly straight away. What we shall do is just artificially build in a very slight delay inside this. You'll remember that we call this .stop game here. Well, when we call stop game, also when the Robin has died or something, let's just set the next spawn time in this as well, and we'll just set that equal to 0.2. The reason for that is if we actually called the set spawn time function, we'd end up with something over a couple of seconds, and that would actually take too long before the first tubes appear on the screen, and it gives you the impression that nothing's actually happening. So that's it then. That's all the code that we actually need inside here. The main thing to do now is actually refresh and run this, and I hope I haven't made too many errors. And I have. I've got TIHS on line 158, so clearly I've made an error somewhere there. I'll just go and find that. Oops. And just refresh again. Okay, and now you'll see that we've got 2.699 in the console. We've spawned 2.599, 2.8. So you can see that we're calling generation of the tubes at random intervals, always be over 2.3 seconds, should never be over 3.1 seconds. And just watching the console a bit as I click, everything seems okay. If I now let the Robin die, then nothing should happen in the console here. It should now have paused all of the spawning of the tubes. In fact, it has. And now if I start again, you can see that we've spawned tubes and then it was set and we're off again. Good. So everything seems to be working. Okay then, so in the next video we can actually get on with adding our tubes to the screen, or at least starting to add them to the screen, which is probably the most complicated part of the whole application. That's it for now. Thanks very much for watching, and see you in the next video.